let's gather once again. We'll keep moving. And some of you were asking if we could do this characteristics analysis sort of a thing. This is something I put together myself. I don't know if you can read this real well and it's not in your notes. But if you ask me afterwards if you want any of these slides or anything emailed to you, I can do that if you give me your email address. So, and I'll try to remember to put my email address up here if you're interested. So, this has to do with characteristics of your child that I'm trying to move with this little analysis here to make an example of how should you respond to characteristics of your child which are not necessarily good or bad, but they're personality characteristics, which shape how they are equipped. If you're analytical, and if that's your designated kind of personality thing, I'm sort of that way, then you might be better equipped for like being an engineer or something like that. Or if you're expressive and emotional, you might be better equipped to be an artist or something like that. I don't understand people like that. Actually, it's interesting. I get to live next door to my oldest son and his 4 kids. His 2 older sons are 17 and 19, and they are as different as night and day, 2 years apart. The older one is a sophomore in college, and he's very analytical and sort of quiet, and he's pursuing engineering. The 17-year-old is quiet, but he's also expressive, and he's more artistic, and he doesn't know what he wants. He's a senior in high school, so he's a little bit behind. And this is part of the dynamics you got to be careful of and be aware of. Be aware of where each child is in their stage of development, and don't expect, like I asked the high school senior guys, what do you think you want for a career? I don't know. And if you ask the kid 2 years older, what do you want for a career? Oh, I want to be an engineer. I mean, it's just like it's settled in his mind. And so kids progress in their maturity, but that's not so much a maturity issue even. That's like a growing in self-awareness, awareness of what your God's gifts are to you and what you might be suitable for. That's a progressive thing. So anyway, let's just run through this real quick. Okay, so characteristics of your child. Now, this is a little bit tricky to follow, but I want to give some examples of things that you as a parent like or dislike about your child, okay? And what you want for that child, and then whether that characteristic is a God-made characteristic that you should not try to change, okay? Or whether it's a sinful characteristic that needs to change, and then how do you shepherd that child along from where he is to increase holiness, sanctification, growth, okay? So let's try this. Okay, so you have a child who is amiable and passive in his personality. And, you happen to like that. Okay? That's what you want. You like his personality, and you dislike aggressive kids. I'm talking generally here. So how do you respond to that? Is that a God-made characteristic? Yes. How would that child be tempted to sin with that personality? He might have a tendency towards laziness. How would you shepherd him? Well, you set appropriate goals for achievement, and you teach diligence, because he's kind of, not inherently lazy. He's amiable in his personality. Does that make sense? So you could get it right or wrong in your response to that. Let's just run real quick through this. Let's say that you have a child who is really talkative and expressive, okay? And you don't like that particularly. You want somebody quieter. Okay, how do you respond? Did God make him that way? Yes. That's personality. God put into one of my kids a characteristic that I don't like, how am I supposed to respond to that? How would you be tempted to respond? Dislike means you're trying to put down, control. You just talk too much. You would create distance, and you'd be responding wrongly. So the way a talkative kid might be tempted to sin would be interrupting a lot, talking too much. And so your job as a parent is to teach verbal control, self-control, okay? But not try to change his personality. Let's try another one. Develop verbal gifts. Maybe that kid should be a preacher or a teacher or something, because he's gifted with words, okay? So you can, even though you may not personally like that, if you're going to serve the Lord and serve the way God's made that child and serve his best interest, you might need to help him develop his God-made skills, okay? Let's try another one. Talkative kid, and you happen to like that, okay? Now maybe your spouse doesn't, and you've got a little dynamic problem there. You got to get on the same page, okay? You have to communicate about this stuff, okay? That's all I'm saying. Okay, you might want him to be a preacher. Is that a God-made characteristic? Yes. Being talkative, you might sin by interrupting a lot like the other kid did, possibly. And you'll want to teach verbal control and develop verbal gifts as a plan for that child. Try another one. Let's say a child is athletic, okay? And you like that, and you want him to succeed in sports. Now, is that a God-made characteristic? Yes. You wouldn't want to change that. But if he's athletic and maybe a low IQ, or just not very self-disciplined, he might be tempted to neglect his school instead of do so. You'd want to teach diligence in school, okay? You also might want to teach him to serve by serving people, by working, doing work projects for people. That would fit his personality, okay? Let's try another one. Athletic. You like that. Low IQ, which you don't like. In fact, you may want him to be a doctor because that's your goal, but it isn't going to fit that kid, okay? So how do you respond? You accept it, yes, as a God-made quality, and yes, he might sin by neglecting school, and you need to teach him diligence in school, but you might want to reduce your expectations for achievement for that child because he's limited by how God made him. Now, how can you figure all that out? By learning each child very, very carefully and over time and with communication. Can't see this one. This was the hard one. Let's say your child is obese. Anybody have one? No, don't answer that. Okay. If your child is obese and you are obese, then you've got a problem, okay? You've got to work on it. So let's say you have an obese child, and what you want for him is normal weight. Is that a God-made characteristic? What would you say? No. This is the only example I'm giving of something that is the way that can change and needs to change. Okay, so how would that person sin? Well, he might be a selfish person. It's all about me. I like food. Don't worry, don't bother me. And you would need to teach him self-control. You're not going to see this up there, but he might also tend to be lazy. And so you would need to teach him to work hard and to serve. Okay? So these are just random examples of how to first of all distinguish between the way God has made a child, then assess what you want, but don't try to change what God has made, and shepherd that child along in your parenting in a way that's appropriate and necessary and helpful for him. Okay. Okay. Can we go to our third session slides, Garrett? on page 9, and we're not going to get through all this because we wasted a little bit of time here, but somebody wanted to see that, so it's good stuff. So this is one of the big problems that comes to you for counseling is parents misjudging kids, having wrong values, not recognizing their God-made characteristics. You've got to get that figured out. In counseling, you can help parents do that. Okay, now we're down to street level on parenting. Procedures, processes. Summary of principles so far are, children are the product of shaping influences and how they respond to them. We've been over that. So how they respond is their responsibility. And you cannot, if a child has been shaped by horrible circumstances, you have to be compassionate and patient, and you have to lead them gently and carefully to God's solution for how they need to respond to life. Okay, that's so important, because that's the way God deals with us. The heart determines behavior, so we have to deal with heart issues. You have authority as God's agent, and you must use it properly. Okay? We've talked about that. You must set a God-oriented worldview before them. How do you do that? By living a really good example of living under God's loving authority, becoming like Christ, all of that. You model that, and then you teach that. Biblical goals must be accomplished through biblical methods. That's so important. God's two methods? No. God has given us two methods for child rearing. Communication and the rod. Those are the biblical terms. We want to get into that here. And those are on that last page of the diagram too. Okay, let's talk about communication. Tom just gave a class on communication. Isn't that interesting? We'll talk a little bit about specifics and types of communication, but the first point here is that communication needs to be woven together with the rod. Okay, the rod is the discipline down focus coming down on the diagram, and communication is coming up, and they need to balance each other. And the shift, there's a gradual shift over time from one more to the other. So just be aware of that, the need for that shift, so that you're not trying to deal with your 2-year-old with 10% discipline and 90% communication. That ain't going to work for a child who's young, who's not mentally developed, who still has an aggressive personality maybe, or who has a sinful heart in any case. You know that starting out. So there's just this balance, okay? There are different types of communication that are useful in parenting, okay? And they're discussed in Scripture. There is teaching, okay? Teaching biblical worldview. This is teaching what to believe. How is a child going to learn what to believe and embrace as truth if he's not taught that? That's communication from Scripture and from your own life, modeling it. That builds the biblical worldview for them. Secondly, instruction, what to do. First is what to believe, how to act, what to do. That's instruction. Then there's rebuke and warning, what not to do. Summarize it just that way. It identifies and censors behavior. It would be kind of like the word admonition. So those first ones, teaching and instruction, you could relate to the lower part of your diagram, and that would be the building up by instruction and communicating truth, okay? Admonition could also be part of the discipline process, the training process, the downward push to identify wrong behavior. In other words, communication works on both sides of this diagram. And communication can be used for positive instruction, and it can also be used for rebuking and correcting, okay? And then there's a concept of entreaty, where you appeal to them. See, we've already covered the concept that you cannot change the heart of your child. What you want is at the end of when they are ready to leave home, you want a child who wants to please God. Okay? Now, he may not know what career he's going to have, but you want him to want to, whatever he does in life, to please the Lord, right? That's what you want. Well, you can't force that into a child. You trust God to build that mindset and that heart orientation, and he will do that if you follow his way of doing things. It may not be perfect, though. And there is recovery from failed parenting, and as somebody mentioned, it seems to be, I don't know what the statistics are, I think there are some stats out there, that of Christian families, once the kids go to college and leave home, they leave the faith. Fairly high percentage. So if you just think about that for a minute, why would that be happening? Would it be because, and what we've been discussing, would it be because the heart has not been shaped to obey God because of want? The wants are God-oriented? Yes. There's something missing there. So it's so easy to teach all the right things and get compliance with the right things for the most part, and yet not coming from the heart will cause them, allow cause to drift away when they're outside of the family structure that they've been raised in. So to me, it's not that that's hopeless at all, but it just emphasizes that when you're in the early years, and while they're at home, really get a hold of these basic principles of things that shape the heart, loving God and loving others and so forth. Okay. Communication is costly. Okay, it takes time. If both spouses are pursuing a career, it's really costly. If the husband's pursuing a career, which he probably is, and you have a stay-at-home mom, then it's easy to be tempted for the husband to let the parenting be done by the mom. Drifting into that is so easy, and you've got to really watch that. Dads have to take the responsibility rather than doing that. Maintaining integrity in communication. Have you ever noticed in your marriage that if you get into a spat, communication is ruined for a while? And it can just take the tiniest little incident to make that happen. Well, that's what happens. Communication is vulnerable to being lost, and so stay current with communication. The results of good communication. There's camaraderie, companionship. You want that with your kids. And you want to be able to restore that if it's been lost or never really established. There's also influence. Really, the parental authority is more of an influence than a control, given the fact that the heart is the basic issue. Does that make sense? You're doing the right things, teaching the right things, modeling the right things, but God has to change the heart of the child. Okay? Another point, there must be dialogue and not monologue. You can't be one directional, otherwise you will not know your child, and you will not be engaging with him to understand where he is, where his struggles are, and you won't be able to help him move to the next step. So actually, child rearing is counseling. Very, very close parallel there. If you don't listen, ask questions and listen, you will not know your counselee or your child, and you won't be able to help them from that. So we train to listen by listening. Okay? The purpose is to understand the child's mind and heart, and the only way to do that is to ask questions and listen well. Okay, using questions. I want to dwell on that a little bit. How are you going to figure out what's going on in the mind of your child? Some things get Some things that are in the heart that are real and motivating stay hidden for years and years, and you may not know it until it comes out later in maybe a sad way. So you have to pursue communication to understand what's really going on in your mind. Ask questions like, what in his heart motivated this? What was the temptation? And have a conversation about that. Why do you think you did that? I want to know. I just want you to share with me. I don't want to tell you why. I want you to will you feel free to share that with me? I'm going to love you anyway. I'm just trying to help you, okay? How did you respond to that temptation? Well, obviously the way you responded was you stole your brother's toy or whatever you did that was wrong. Why? What was tempting about that? Well, it's a better toy than I had, and I wanted it, so I just did it. It was there, I was bigger than him, so I just did it. Oh, okay. Well, so tell me about that. What kind of a motivation is that? Is that loving? Is that selfish? In other words, have these kind of conversations. It's an opportunity to help him understand God's standards and accept his own behavior and responses. See, it's not enough to tell them, but they have to discover for themselves with your help. Okay? Use questions to reveal the heart. And here's some sample questions I want to share with you. Proverbs 20, verse 5 says, the purposes of a man's heart are deep waters, but a man of understanding draws them out. That's what we're talking about, that process. You can do it with questions. And be unwilling to settle for distance, avoidance, and non-answers. Okay? Ask questions before making statements. Accusations harden the heart. Questions soften the heart. Okay? So here's just some examples of questions that you might want to use. Ask questions that will allow the child to reveal his thoughts and motives and values and beliefs and goals and desires and purposes. You can actually discover that by asking questions, and then listen well. What were you thinking at the time? You might want to jot some of these down. They're very helpful questions, and I don't have them in the notes. What were you thinking? Not, what were you thinking? No, tell me. So tell me what was going on in your mind that led up to what you did, which might have been some horrible thing. And you've gotten over your anger, and you've given the proper discipline if it was appropriate, and now you're having a discussion about it. You're studying it, okay? Tell me about what you were thinking, okay? Why was that so important to you? What is it that you wanted? Why was that important to you? Did you really want something so bad that you were willing to do something wrong to get it? Now, see, that would lead toward a discussion of what? Idolatry. See, these are biblical concepts. And unless we frame these ideas and discussions in biblical terms, we're not going to get the biblical solution. Okay? It's so crucial. What were you trying to accomplish? Well, I wanted to do this. I wanted to get this done. It could be a whole range of things. But look for honest answers. What were you afraid of? See, fear is a powerful motivation within all of us, really. The Bible has answers for fear. There are good answers and there are bad answers. The wrong answers for fixing fear could be running away, avoidance, it could be attacking, it could be all kinds of bad things. Whereas the correct, what you want to lead the child towards is that fear is fixed by trusting in God, His sovereignty over what's going on in your life and so forth. What were you trying to get? Why did you become so angry? What were you angry at? And have open, honest discussion about this. Dig out carefully and gently and lovingly what's really in their heart. And if you could go back, what would you change and why? That's a very helpful discussion. Not that we can always go back and change things in life. Oh, if only I hate that mentality because it's not real. And it's not dealing properly with what's the current situation. Now, if you have hurt somebody, you can go back and fix that by repenting, confessing, and being humble, and getting forgiveness and so forth. Damage can be repaired. Okay, so those are just some sample questions. Okay, moving to the second main tool that God has given parents, discipline, the rod. Not a very popular concept, but I want to think about this just for a few minutes. This focuses on the chastisement or correction that is part of idea, the upper category on your diagram. It's a very biblical concept. We've got to figure out though what it means. See, I made a couple points here at the bottom of page 9 I'd like you to think about. Child rearing requires more than instruction and direction. Do you believe that? You think most parents believe that? Or are you just basically the guider to your child? Your child's basically good. He doesn't have a horrible background yet. He'll turn out fine if you just give him some teaching and guide him a little bit. Is that going to work for child rearing? No, it will not. Why won't it work? And we've got to get a grip on this, or we won't go there. That's the problem. Okay. Children need correction. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Well, whose heart? Mine, yours, each of our kids. The heart is wicked. Men are fallen. We have to realize that as the beginning point for life. We're sinners. There's a need for correction. Foolishness is, do you believe this? Foolishness is bound up in your kid's heart. Well, it's like it comes naturally. It's there. What are you going to do about it? Well, he says that the rod of discipline will remove it. Really? Well, that says that discipline is necessary. It's not optional. And you can cover it up. You can use different techniques. But if you do that, you're not going to deal with the root heart issues of the child. The rod and reproof give wisdom. But a child who gets his own way brings shame to his mother and father and family. Wow, that's in the Bible. So sinfulness is inherent in everybody. We've got to understand that. Not that there's a simple fix, but we've got to understand that as a foundational thing. Okay. And here's one of the most classic examples in the Bible. Eli, who was a priest, right, a head guy, and that was during a time when, in the Judges, when there weren't any real kings or strong leaders. The priest was often the leader of the people of Israel. Now the sons of Eli were worthless men who did not know the Lord. His sons were bad kids, okay? But they were in the temple doing their working with the sacrifices and all that. Thus, the sin of the young men was very grave in the sight of the Lord, for the men treated the offering of the Lord with contempt. They explained how they did that. They were receiving the offerings from the people, and they took the best cuts of meat and either kept them for themselves or gave them to their dad. That's showing contempt for the offering. And he said, this is Eli's response to his kids now. Why do you sons do such things? For I hear of your evil dealings from all the people. Why then do you, Eli, this is God talking to Eli. So Eli was a clueless father, is what that says. He was not so much clueless as he was abandoning his parental role by failing to address the sinfulness, the sinful patterns that grew into really bad things with little kids. And God says, Eli, why do you scorn my sacrifices and my offerings that I commanded, and honor your sons above me by fattening yourselves on the choicest parts of every offering of my people Israel? So here's what the Lord did in response. Therefore the Lord, the God of Israel, declares, I promised beforehand that your house and the house of your fathers should go in and out before me forever. Priest is a very powerful, important position. But now the Lord declares, far be it from me, for those who honor me I will honor, and those who despise me shall be lightly esteemed. And this that shall come upon your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, shall be a sign to you. Both of them shall die on the same day. And I will raise up for myself a faithful priest who shall do according to what's in my heart and my mind. And I declare that I'm about to punish his house forever for the iniquity that he knew, because his sons were blaspheming God, and he did what? Not restrain them. He failed in his parenting because he didn't realize it was not an innocent ignorance. He was a priest. He knew the law. He knew the truth. But he failed to address the fallenness of his children in a proper way, and the outcome was horrible. So what does that say about God's thinking about this? Well, he thinks it's very important to provide discipline and training. Okay, now look at the top of page 10 for a minute. I'd like you to seriously consider this statement, which is not mine, fortunately. It's a quote from Ted Phipps, Shepherding a Child's Heart, page 108. So if you have a problem, talk to Ted. What is the rod? What is, and we're not going to use the word punishment. It's not punishment. It's the bringing of pain, discomfort, uncomfortable consequences for sin. Okay, that's what it is. Consider this definition. The rod is a parent in faith toward God and faithfulness toward for his children, okay, undertaking the responsibility, God said you need to do this, of careful, timely, measured, and controlled use of physical punishment. Physical, it uses the word punishment, but it's not to punish, it's to bring. What word would you put in there that doesn't sound like you're punishing him for his sin? Pain. What's another one? Huh? Chastening. It's the bringing of pain, which could be physical or could be emotional. It's confronting the sinful behavior with a kind of a shock that is to indicate that this is wrong. Okay. A kid needs to understand that this is wrong, and that's how you're going to get him to continue to do it. That's what God says. Okay, to underscore the purpose of obeying God. Okay? Thus rescuing a child from continuing in his foolishness until death. Now, I added this sentence myself. You can talk to me about this. Discipline includes spanking for younger children and rebuke for older children, as well as other forms of consequences. Okay? So I think there's flexibility here. And we'll get down to this, but spanking is only appropriate for the early years, almost always. Maybe the first 4 or maybe 5 years. I say 5, others say 4 years. And with my kids, we had 4 kids, never any spankings after maybe 4 and a half, 5 at the most. Because the discipline process was working well enough. And I didn't have perfect kids, although there's some. Okay, so think about that. Okay, avoiding wrong methods is also important. We're just going to walk quickly through this. Wrong methods would include repeated instructions, okay, repeated requirements. You need to have your room clean by 7:30 a.m. or whatever it is, okay, and no response. Okay, so you repeat it, you repeat. repeat. That trains the child indirectly to disobey if there's no follow-up. Okay? Bribery bypasses the right motivation. You know, if you clean your room today, I'll give you a quarter. To a small kid, that's a big deal. It has to be $1 probably. It bypasses the correct motivation, which is to obey because your parents are requiring it, and it's a good thing for you to learn. You know, learn discipline and so forth. To allow excuses. The victim mentality is very much a part of our culture. Oh, I don't feel good, or whatever. You know, kids are really good at creating excuses, and you have to assess where they are with that, and it might make sense, or it might not. To trick, manipulate, or negotiate is appealing to, you're deceiving him. It's deception, and that, of course, is wrong. Effects of wrong methods. Deals wrongly with the heart issues. You don't get to those correct heart issues. Leaves them shallow, confused about their heart needs. They're not leaning in to understand what really is behind the disobedience. It encourages idols to rule the heart. If you're going to bribe, then, okay, well, you know, maybe I'll get more the next time if I just hesitate to use. So forth. Encourages idolatry. Character is ignored. Acting rightly for the right reasons. It produces distance. As a child, kids are really smart. They understand what the parent is doing and what's motivating. Okay. How do you develop wisdom and conviction? How do you develop maturity? Think about that for me, kids. We must appeal to their conscience, which is a God-given sense of right and wrong. God builds a conscience into everybody. Romans 2 talks about that. And so you appeal to that God-given thing. And Jesus did this too. I know you can't probably read this, but maybe you can. Let me just read through this. What do you think? Jesus said. Parable of the two sons. There was a man who had two sons. He went to the first and said, "Son, go work today in the vineyard." "I will not," he answered. Rebellious kid. But later, he reconsidered and went and did it. So he obeyed after resisting at first, okay? Then the father went to the other son and said the same thing. He answered, "I will, sir," but he didn't go. Which of the two sons did what the father wanted? The first, they answered. And Jesus said to them, "Truly I tell you, the tax collectors and prostitutes are entering the kingdom of God ahead of you. For John came to you to show you the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But the tax collectors and the prostitutes did. And even after you saw this, you did not repent and believe him." So be careful about what's going on in the hearts of your kids and their responses. Okay? So this gets correction beyond the behavior to address the issues of the heart. So if a child is going to comply with your demands, something you want them to do, and they're resisting, you can have a little discussion about, well, why don't you? Tell me, why do you not want to do this? Would you agree that this is a good thing to do? Yeah. Well, what's inside your thinking that's keeping you from being willing to do this? And have a little discussion, and then go ahead with the requirement. You might learn something about your thinking. Discipline prepares for receiving the gospel by exposing the inability to obey, to love and obey. Loving obedience does not come naturally to kids or to their parents. It isn't natural, but it can grow in Christ, okay? It also avoids settling for only keepable standards. That was the problem the Pharisees had. Jesus told them, in effect, you guys make a lot of rules. Well, you make the ones that it's easier for you to keep, and you can require those of other people. Well, that's not God's standards. That's keepable. Easily keepable standards are not going to be good enough. self-righteousness also. Okay, and then thirdly, developing wisdom in these conditions, embrace the right goals. The goal of obedience is insufficient. Only obedience motivated by love is good enough. Are we in agreement on that at this point? Okay. Avoid wrong goals. For example, external compliance only. That abandons the heart issues. Omitting attitudes and heart issues. Gaining control only. I want to make my life peaceful as a parent, and I'm just setting these rules up so my life is comfortable and easy. That doesn't accomplish anything in the hearts of kids. Safety and excessive rules. Legalism is very tempting. Pharisees did that to kind of control the culture. We can be tempted to do that to control the home. Safety and excessive isolation from evil influences. Now that's a whole topic in itself. How much exposure do you allow your kids to have to the evils of the world? That's a big discussion. It has to be monitored, controlled, and as you get up into the teen years, there aren't simple guidelines for this. But you do need to teach your kids to understand and perceive the evils that are in the world, but without exposing them at a level that tempts them to, so they are tempted by them. Now that's a tricky boundary. So I think what it boils down to is a gradual exposure to some bad stuff, like in movies and stuff like that, but with instruction. Let's think about that bad thing that is portrayed in that movie. Let's talk about it. And that can be used for instruction. But you got to be careful. But on the other hand, complete isolation from the evils of the world isn't going to work. What are they going to experience when they leave home and go to college? The internet. If they have not been prepared for that, they're going to collapse. They're a huge, huge danger. Then there's another thing which we don't really have a lot of time for. And that's distinguishing between issues that are boundary and wisdom type. So, I don't know what that is. Maybe try this a little bit. Okay. Areas of responsibility are in the center. These would be things that are what God has called me to do, and we must seek to understand and obey them. Clear scriptural requirements, okay? Outside that, there's going to be a huge area where there would be concerns, but they're not specific directions in Scripture about. So it's going to require decisions about life, okay? God does not have written in His Word whether you should be a ditch digger or a dentist, okay? So you got to figure that out. And there are lots of other issues in life that are not fairly, that take wisdom to figure out what is the right way. And so the biggest answer to this is, for me, is Psalm 37. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. I wish we had time to unfold that. If by loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, okay, that's the basic thing. If you are pursuing that, He will work in your heart to help you want to do what He wants. Now, that means your motives will be right, and once your motives are right, then the decisions you make are probably going to be just fine. Whether it's one option over another, whatever it is, okay? So there are just a whole area of decision making that isn't always clearly revealed in Scripture. So we pray for our teenagers, kids, who show compassion, because we understand that these God requirements are not natural and easy. We discipline them, we set an example, and the outer boundary things we may have discipline. What is their response going to be? See, this includes not only fuzzy, what is God's will in this situation, but that's part of it, okay? But the other thing is the response of the child to our training. We don't have control over that. So we have to entrust that as a parent to God. Okay, that's in the outer boundary too. And we err in two ways. One, we expand the inner circle, attempting to do what only God can do, take over God's role. That's tempting because we want the control. Or we minimize the inner circle as we expect God to do our job. Those are two ways to err here. So the middle one is obedience issue, the other is entrusting to God issue, and that's just a helpful way to kind of think about that. Oh boy, let's see. Let's go to the next page. Cut some things shorter here. Well, at the bottom of page 10 it says teach interaction with the culture. I want to spend just a minute on that. How do we teach our kids to interact with the culture, which we've already said is pretty bad and getting worse? Okay? We need to avoid isolation, excessive isolation. We need to avoid excessive assimilation or imitation of the culture. So there's a balancing here of exposure and training to understand and interact with discerning what's right and wrong and so forth. The next page, pursue understanding and learning to recognize cultural values. And I'll just refer to this. This is a page which you can't read here, but it's in Age of Opportunity, the teenage book, which is out in the other room. That's my highest recommendation for the teen years of parenting. And this is a very good summary of cultural idols and just how to think about them. Talks about relativism and a lot of different cultural things. I think this would be a very helpful reference for you. Avoiding idolatry, we went over this. Being controlled by your wants. This is something to teach our kids. I understand. We've talked about this multiple times. I understand what you want in this situation and you've agreed with me how you failed in this in many ways. What is really behind it? What is the deepest want that's driving it? And how in the world do you think this could be changed? How could you change from the inside out to really want what God wants? You've got to have those kind of discussions with your kids, along with appropriate consequences and so forth. Anyway, there it is. So James 4 explains how our wants drive us. So he's telling us to deal with our wants. Don't ignore our wants. Okay? And here's another factor in parenting. Your influence on your children is more often taught, which is one kind of crude way to say it. Imitation of example is a powerful tool that God has given us. We need to imitate God, right? Therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children. We're imitating our Father. Okay? We want to become like Him. If you want to become like Him, you will pursue becoming like Him. That's what we can teach our kids to want, okay, as well. Okay? Is imitating you the same as imitating God? Parents, heart-searching question. And when it's not, you need to confess that. Confess your inconsistency between what you find yourself doing and what you want the kids to do. That humility is crucial to maintaining connection and trust and imitating. Here's another point. You have inescapable influence on your kids, and here's an example. Okay. I'm not sure whether the donkey or the zebra is the dad and the mom, but parents have an inescapable influence on their kids. Part of your characteristics are going to come out in your kids. So it's just to be a good example. Model what you want for your kids, not because of that, but because you want to please the Lord. If you model a lifestyle of pleasing God no matter what, that will be the most powerful influence on your kids to want the same thing. And then I've got a whole section here that we don't have a lot of time for on cultivating a heart for God. And God has given us all kinds of tools here. So, number 7 there. Modeling is crucial. Taught more than taught, or influence is crucial. Don't settle for just obedience and compliance only. Go for the heart motive. Expect heart motivation of love for God and others. Model and then teach who God is. And the scripture's just full of scriptures. And I wish we had the time, but I knew we wouldn't. Just look at a couple. 1 Timothy 1:5. The aim of our charge is love that issues from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. Paul wanted his people to grow in love for God. I pray that Christ may dwell in your heart through faith, and that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth, length, height, and depth, and to know the love of Christ. To grow in love was a major goal that Paul had for his people. It's a love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled up with all the fullness of God. And here's the hope. Now to him who is able to do far more than we can ask or think, according to the power at work within us, that's the power source. God will enable what he has required to be done, whether it's in parenting or in our own sanctification. So cultivating, another one I wanted to show for sure is 2 Corinthians 3. I'll move forward here faster. Growth results from knowing God better. Did you know that? Or is that just theology stuff? No. We all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord. How do you behold God's glory? In the Word, in prayer, and fellowship, and communication with God. You're beholding His glory. What happens? We're being transformed into the same image. Now, God said this. This is not a man-made principle. This is not just a mechanical exercise with a given outcome. If we are cultivating our relationship with God by being in the Word and praying and listening to God, that's a conversation with God. When you read the Bible, you're listening to God. When you pray, you're talking back to it. If that is your lifestyle, you're going to be changed from the inside out by the work of the Holy Spirit, who inspires the Word, who indwells you, and will make this change happen. Yes, it's kind of a mysterious process, but it's real. And if parents are doing this and modeling this in front of their kids, the kids will be invited to do that. So we'll be transformed into God's image. And then it says in 1 John 4, let us love one another, for love is from God. Whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. If you don't love God, you don't know God, because God is love. If these qualities are yours and are increasing, they keep you from being ineffective or unfruitful in the knowledge of Christ. See, this is spiritual progression at its base. And He's given us the tools to do this. I wish we had more time. We don't. Jump down to D on page 11. Practical tips to develop loving children. Verbalize often the goal of loving and serving. Talk to your kids. That's what it said in Deuteronomy 6. Talk to your kids all the time about God's laws and His truth. Create opportunities to serve. How do you teach kids to become servants? Well, take them with you on serving projects. I did that with my kids, and my grandkids you get to now. They learn to serve, and they find the joy in serving by you provide the opportunity for them to learn that. It works really well. Verbalize in the context of conflict, the topic itself. Be affectionate at all ages and express your love or your delight in each of your kids. Pray with them in many situations. Oh, there's just so many examples. I like worms. And so when I see a worm on the driveway in the rain, and it's just kind of flopping around there, I always rescue that worm. And I teach my little grandkids to do it. wow, God made this worm and he's struggling. We can rescue this worm. We can pick him up and put him in the grass, and what's that going to do for him? It's going to save his life, and it's a good thing. I love doing that, and it's a great teaching. Kind of dumb maybe, but it's a great teaching mechanism for young grandkids or kids, okay? And it shows where your heart is. Celebrate when you see good things coming out of them. Verbalize celebration. Model love in your marriage. Accept who each child is. Get this last one here. Many kids who fail to find their parents' acceptance will welcome it from the first group or individual who offers it. That's in that tips book. Many adults still crave their parents' approval. This is true. Affection is not a substitute for acceptance. Put away all bitterness or dislike. Get rid of those dislikes of anything in your kids. Forgive them if they've offended. Practice listening to each one. Pursue companionship with each one. Do dates with your kids and grandkids. And manage screen time. We could spend a whole hour on that one. Manage screen time. There are guidelines for that. Excessive screen time is damaging to the brain. It creates isolation. It allows the child to not engage, build relationships. There's some important guidelines there. And then cultivate biblical character qualities. One thing that we have at the Flying Ant Youth Ranch is it's a list of character qualities with negative and positive in a bunch of different categories. And we actually use those to reflect back to the students, the boys, how their character is expressing itself and where they need to grow. And I'm not suggesting a mechanical, legalistic term. Yeah, there it is. Good job. I'm not recommending this to be incorporated into your parenting, but it works really well at the ranch where we have a lot of control and we have a lot of ability to provide consequences and incentives and so forth. But we're also loving. We're trying to be collective parents to these boys. Okay, it's really important. So it wouldn't hurt to. These are all biblical categories of character and lack of character. So it's just something that you could use if you want. Okay, changes of development is a huge thing, and we don't have time for it. But notice here under E, parenting strategies need to shift. The goals are all the same, but the strategies shift a little bit as that progression line goes upward. You shift your strategy. So in the first years, there's going to be a high degree of control. There'll be discipline, perfect modeling, of course, love and affection, all that. And the 5 to 12 range, 4 to 12 or whatever, you're going to emphasize character qualities because kids can start to understand the concept and the relationship to God and others and so forth. You can teach about love and trust and so forth. And so there's correction and instruction. You can start dealing with the hard issues a little bit better. And modeling with love and affection is important. And the third one, teen years, is more of an emphasis on teaching the fear of the Lord, loving God and others, trusting Him. And if you have gotten beyond the ability to discipline so hard that you're going to use pain, pain isn't going to work as well because they're tougher. Okay, they're older, they're more mature, they're thinking for themselves, they're building their worldview. What you have shaped them to understand is what they're going with, and they're going to carry forward. But you still have a period of influence there where things can be discussed and shifted, and there's growth. And then in adulthood, look at those. I came up with these words. During the first few years, you're a commander. The mid 5 to 12, you're a coach. In the teen years, you're a co-laborer. You're sympathizing with their struggles, and you're going with them and encouraging them and requiring them to. And then you're a companion for life. Okay. We'll need to stop there. And there's so many more questions, but one thing I might, if you you slide 50, Garrett? If you want any of this stuff emailed to you or whatever, have questions, I'd be glad to communicate with you, so let me know. Thanks a lot, guys.